Okay, I think we are live. We hopefully are.
Stop broadcast. Yes, but we are live.
We are live. I think we are. Hello, everyone. I hope this is working and that you're able to see us and to hear us. Future Learn changed slightly what we were meant to do, so this is new to us. So fingers crossed. My name is Giovanna and I am a lecturer here at the University of Glasgow in the School of Education.
And my name is Elwira Grossman. I work in the School of Modern Languages and Cultures, actually in the College of Arts, not in the School of Education, but I have enjoyed my collaboration with colleagues from the School of Education tremendously. It has become very tight over the period of time, especially when we worked on this course. I am very happy to be here today. I am a teacher of Polish and comparative literature, and I have enjoyed a lot of comments that have been posted. We had a lovely exchange with Giovanna just before our broadcast, and hopefully we can address some of these points now with you. I am not quite sure whether we can hear your questions.
Well, that is what I was going to say. I can see that we have viewers online at the moment. The only problem is that we used to have a window. Let me just double check this here. No. We used to have a window where the names... Ah, there you go. Wait.
Okay, where people could post their questions.
Okay, so we do have a chat facility, so you should hopefully be able to post questions, and we should be able to answer your questions. If you type them, they should appear in our box here. So we do have people who are watching us live. Please do join us and ask questions. If you can't or you don't want to use this, Kaja, one of the teachers that have been feeding back all this time, is on Twitter, and she can collect questions on Twitter as well, and she can pass them on to us. So you can also use Twitter if you feel more comfortable with that.
Well, yes, so I think we can start from some of the fascinating points you raised after reading some of the text and also viewing the tapes. I mean, I think perhaps the interesting one would be one of the questions that Kamil, who is a bilingual speaker of Polish and English as well, raised. And I think it's a question that actually kind of appeared in many responses that were posted. And the question is, to what extent, by the fact that we speak English, we also undermine the main message that we wish to convey. In a sense, you know, we talk about imperialistic language, we talk about all the power, and yet we also use the imperialistic language in order to make our points and interact with you. Well, yeah, I think it is a paradox, but I think at the same time, it's worth thinking about the fact that English has actually changed its function a lot, you know, since the time of colonization. And from being the tool of oppression, it actually changed into being a tool of liberation, if you wish, because a lot of writers who decided to write, African writers and writers who were exposed to colonization, decided to write in English and precisely write about this particular experience. So in a way, by broadcasting to the world and a much wider circle of readers their experience, also all the problematics, all the politics that is involved in imposing one language over other, and one culture over other cultures, helped a lot, yes, to make people aware of what the process of colonization was about and what the consequences it brought. So we are very much aware of this paradox, but at the same time we use English is a tool of communication, as an educational tool. It does not come with a very aggressive demand on other speakers to give up their languages. Yes? To the contrary, we want you to become aware of political mechanisms involved in this kind of very aggressive demands, in this kind of a politics, very invasive politics, and actually make up, yes, your own mind, whether you are going or how you are going to address this particular issue, and to what extent you can resist this kind of imperialistic function of the language.
And there's also, I mean, we have tried as much as possible this on a more practical level, Elwira was talking more a theoretical level, on a practical level. We've tried to encourage the use of languages other than English in the course of our course. But there are limitations to what we can do, which are also imposed by the platform that we're using, which is wonderful and allows us to do all this and to offer this for free. However, there are also issues of ensuring that everything can be kept under control, and so ensuring that the languages that are spoken, they can be checked, that no abuse, nothing untoward is happening. And so I'm afraid there is a requirement that we stick to English, even when we could use, there are speakers of Italian out there that I could engage in Italian with, but the requirement is that we try not to, we avoid that.
Yes, but there is also an issue of inclusivity. Yes, we want to be as inclusive as we want. So obviously, if we speak Italian, those who don't know Italian will understand us. And if I start speaking Polish, yes, also the circle of our listeners will be limited. And this is, in a sense, yes, touches also the key issue when it comes to decolonization, because it has been a hugely debated issue. Okay, should African writers, should colonized people, not only African writers, but other colonized people, actually reject the language of the oppressor and talk, yes, in their own, and write in their own indigenous languages? And obviously, yes, a lot of writers decided to do this. Okay, Chinua Achebe decided to write in Gikuyu at some stage, rejected English. But at the same time, okay, there is still a question. All right, you limit the circle of readers. You limit the impact of what you can say and how many people you can reach. So there is this kind of a very painful paradox. We are stuck with it as well.
But Chinua Achebe, or there's also the name now escapes the academic that wrote the Decolonizing the Mind. What's his name?
Guiwa Tionga.
Yes. So where they actually write, being fluent English speakers, they write in their in the language. In this case, I can't remember the name of the language either, which is quite poor of me. And then rely on translation, so they can translate themselves into English. But the first step, the first work is in English. So that's another way of opposing. But yes, you have to have also communicate and try and reach as many people as possible. So this paradox is perhaps impossible to not to have. It's acceptable.
Well, I mean, we obviously can, present arguments for and against, just like the post-colonial writers did. But this also takes us to another question that ECs, have a very broad and general question: in what ways decolonization is possible? And obviously, this raises a huge area and brings a lot of issues, because obviously you cannot uproot the language that has been used for several decades. It's really impossible to do. So even people who actually try to find a way is in the process of decolonization, and in what they would like to do at this particular stage and time, they also argue among themselves. So we do not have one specific set of principles regarding post-colonization. We have people who have different views, who are those who, for example, claim that sticking to this language can be very, very beneficial for their culture as well. Their children have learned it, they have learned it. Why can't we promote our heritage through this means? And actually, again, as I said, is turn this language into a tool of liberation. But there are also people who claim quite clearly that the very important thing is to keep the dialogue about the colonization going, to make people aware, yes. To raise this general awareness, and at the same time, re-acknowledge how it was before colonization. The question to what extent this is possible is, it's again another very complex issue, but again, to resist, yes, this kind of a political imperialism through language is the main issue. And how we do this, there are as many answers as different groupings of people. And there is also a talk about neo-colonization. I mean, precisely speaking English is very often treated in this way, that in a way, what colonization did, now globalization does to a large extent. And globalization now is this kind of an evil, if you wish, in many respects, because it imposes the view of the West onto the East yet again. But there are many layers in this discussion as well.
But I think, and perhaps if you have been watching any of the other hangouts, this is something that I've said before, and it's that this course really did not set out to give you recipes, a list of to do and not to do and don'ts, do and don'ts, but rather think about things, just not taking things for granted, not taking things as natural. There's nothing natural in English being the dominant language, at least in part of the world. This is not true, by the way, because in other parts of the world, but in our parts of the world it is. And not thinking that this is just natural, and that the fact that some languages have to die, that is natural, that some languages are minoritized, that is natural. There's nothing natural. Languages are a part of the social, and they are something that is constructed socially, and as such they can be object of oppression, suppression, and also the opposite and of revitalization. And this brings me to, I think, a question by it was Elisa, who said, by the way, Elisa, it's not Maria, it's not Grazia, who is the Friulano, it's me. So yes, we are from the same part of Italy, apparently. But you say at one point that language, maybe that's a natural process that we must accept, that some languages must die. I'm wondering if protective actions are not making a good job. First, the language, it's like a living thing, so and if it's not used, it must die. But this connects to what I was saying before. Languages are not entities that exist without people. They are constructed in interaction. They are part of an interaction, and they are a social tool that we use all together, societies and groups use all together. And they are the object of policies and politics. And so a language can be suppressed, and many languages have been suppressed, sometimes violently. And languages can be revitalized, and there are plenty of examples of languages which are being revitalized, some with more with more success than others. To talk about Basque, for example, or well, Catalan, which was never as endangered as others. Maori, there's lots of work that's been done, and here in Scotland a lot of work is being done to revitalise, and a lot of investment is being put into revitalising Gaelic. So there are possibilities, but this needs to be done, as a proper investment needs to take place. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Sorry, we've got a nasty window that came up. So there needs to be adequate investment, and sometimes, as is in the case of Friulano, there are tokenistic, 1 hour here and there that really don't make any difference. Gaelic has borrowed from Hebrew in that with the Alpan, I think they're pronounced, the schools, full immersion schools in which Gaelic is spoken, and you have to have a certain amount of time and a certain amount of exposure to a language in order for it to actually to actually work. Otherwise, there's no much point. And and the second question that you linked to this was that sometimes minority languages or minoritized languages kind of limit themselves or try and construct barriers so not to be endangered. And I would argue that there might be the case, but what if in some cases it is the majority speaking population that needs to move towards the minority or minoritized language. So if we had people who are happy to take on these minoritized languages, they would not be minoritized anymore. And so it is really a matter of expanding the number of languages which we speak. And I stop here, or do you want to add anything, Elwira? Because otherwise I've got another question I wanted to go on to.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I could add is actually another point that one of the participants made online, and the point was, all right, I mean, obviously big imperialistic languages, languages with imperialistic past have a lot of resources and a lot of financial strength in order to be promoted and spoken through major parts of the world. But then, the question is, how do you resource all these minority languages? I mean, if you really do not have these kind of resources, and the answer is that obviously, well, you cannot. I mean, all you could do is just count on people who are attached to these languages and want to speak these languages and want to pass them on to other generations. There isn't really any kind of a golden mean that we could suggest or even prescribe. And I was very much taken by the comments made by Krishnamurti, who listed all his languages and actually listed by talking about various events in his life that prompted him to take the language up, and expressed, yes, this wonderful feeling of sadness that his mother tongue, Tamil, I think, if I remember this correctly, is kind of leaving him now, because obviously, his life has developed in such a way that if he wants to read literature in Tamil now, he has some kind of aid. But there is nothing wrong with this. What is so wonderful is that you have this highly engaging attitude with all the languages around you, and that you do not force people to speak languages they do not wish. You open up in order to make them feel comfortable when they speak other languages, and very often you engage in what we very broadly discussed as languaging. Okay, you kind of keep you pick up some phrases, you learn some of the languages that are the community languages in order to make these people who speak the language more welcome, to feel like they belong to this place. And that's very, very important. It's a matter of attitude. It's not only certain political mechanisms, but attitude that we all can assume, can absorb, that we can also learn through becoming more and more aware of certain political codification that actually do harm to people. And we had the examples of what kind of harm, yes, these political rules can rules of imposition can make in the text regarding linguistic imperialism, when I listed all these three examples. But well, yes, you know, there isn't really any kind of a clear answer to this. And perhaps just really to reinforce the point that Giovanna made earlier about is the nature of our course. There is nothing prescriptive about it, okay? We do not tell you to dislike English, and we do not tell you to give up English. What we want you really to get out of this course is more awareness, more deeper awareness, yes, more questions, more complexities that come to the front, that you become more aware, and then you can make up a well-informed decision, and your attitude is and your own behavior can be affected by the knowledge you gain. We are not here to tell you what to do and what not to do. In other words, what mostly preoccupies is how to think, not what to think.
Yes.
And obviously, we are gaining a lot from reading your comments as well. I'm
learning about languages I've never heard of.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and Krishnamurti is the case in point here too. And a comment made by Karen Martin, I think, who was referring to her own experience of living between three languages. Is Austrian and Slovenian were two of them, and you made this wonderful point about what a waste of invaluable resource, because there is clearly this very strong attitude in the area that Slovenian is the inferior language, that Slovenian is the language that people are ashamed to speak. That, again, this is a result of some kind of political mechanisms that obviously do not respect people, do not respect other human beings, and a total lack of empathy.
It's a case of verbal hygiene.
Yes, absolutely. You know. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Mm-hmm.
And talking about actually, sorry, there was one little question that Elisa had about Friulano and whether living abroad I still understand and speak it. Yes, is the answer to that. Whenever I go home, that's all I speak. So in fact, it's my Italian which is suffering a lot more, because when I'm here I speak English, when I go home I speak Friulano, and so I get less chance to speak Italian. And whether I did transmit it to my children, no, I didn't. Speak Italian to them. And am I sorry? Yes, a little bit. However, having taken them to Friuli all their lives, they're now 22, the older ones, they understand it completely. And my youngest is 18, is now planning to do linguistics at university. So obviously a trace has been left, and one of her interests is actually looking at comparing languages. So that's come from a lifetime of comparing her different languages, so English, Italian, and the Friulano that she heard. She doesn't speak, but that she heard. And so speaking different languages, and also different languages at different times and at different levels. I mean, when we speak about multilingualism, we don't usually speak about speaking 2, 3, 4 languages equally well. We're not talking about plural monolingualism, but multilingualism is speaking several languages at different levels of competence, and it doesn't necessarily have to be they're all at the same level of competence, and things will change. And I remember discussing this with one of the learners. Apologies, I can't remember the name, but about how we change, and how I feel that my relationship with languages constantly shifts. There are times and there are places where English is feels better for me. And there are times and there are places where Italian feels better, time and places where Friulano feels better, and those are not solidified, and those might change over time depending on what I do and how I feel and my personal relationships, because languages are a lot more than just tools for communication. One of the questions that Ben asked is how we can encourage children to speak languages that might not be in their long-term economic interest to learn. And I think that by example, by leading by example, by being interested in languages, by trying, by saying, oh, I wonder what language that is. It's really just by showing respect and curiosity and the will to explore other languages. And as I say, they might not pick up and become fluent, I don't know, Tigrinya speakers, but maybe just picking up a few words and just having this positive attitude. We don't just learn languages for economic interest. We might want to learn languages because they're the languages that are spoken by our friends, because they are the languages that are spoken in our communities, because they are the languages that are spoken, in that moment in time, are important or interesting, and so on. So there are, because there might be the languages of our ancestors, so we go back in the past, we can project in the future the ones that we think might be useful for us in the future, and so on. So, you know, there are many languages.
I mean, there is also, in Ben's question, there is this assumption is that nothing will change, and what is not into economic interest today will not be in the future. We can't possibly know this. Okay?
No, yes, this day in time with even less. So, yeah.
Precisely in post-Brexit days, especially. But no, really, the point is that, look, you know, you might actually think that you have thought out the future for your children, and you force the child, in a sense, perhaps encourage, that's not a very strong
yes.
word, yes, just to speak English because this is in the child's best economic interest. Then it turns out that the child, you know, 20 years later doesn't get the job he would have gotten or she would have gotten because she doesn't know the language that this particular job actually asks for and demands the knowledge of. So in a sense, we cannot make this assumption, okay? The idea is we are open-minded and inclusive as much as we can, and obviously we start from ourselves. And Joanna made this wonderful point. I mean, just speaking a little bit along the lines of Giovanna said earlier, one of our participants, Joanna, said when the question was asked, do you feel different? Do you feel like a different person if you speak a different language? Okay, do you feel real in one only language, and then other languages feel very artificial? And Joanna, who, if I remember correctly, speaks Cantonese, Russian, Spanish, and is actually a native English speaker, is responded to this question beautifully, saying, I speak different languages, and all of them are real me. All of them are real me. And I think, well, that's precisely the point, is even regardless of the level of fluency, is you can feel attachment to a particular language that will enhance certain elements of your personality and will enhance certain elements of your identity, of your sense of belonging. And who is to say that this is less real than another language, or that the language that tends to be privileged at a particular country and time. So
there's this issue of identity that is quite interesting and sort of related in a way, and this idea that our identity is monoblock. Whether it's our personal identity or whether it's a national identity, that there is such thing as one, which doesn't change in space or doesn't change in time, which is totally not the case. And so, yes, I mean, that's what I meant to say, that, you know, it's the languages that I feel more comfortable in will change, you know, and will respond to different parts of my identity. And and then sometimes they come out unexpected. I wrote to someone an example of a few nights ago, going back home from university, and almost being run over. I had to jump out of the way, literally. You know, if I hadn't jumped, I would not be here. And I got really angry with the driver, obviously, and all this Friulano came out. So I shouted at this poor man in Friulano. Obviously, it didn't make any sense to him. But that was what came out in that moment of real panic, and I was actually quite surprised and amused when the fear had gone. I was really amused that that came out.
Nobody beat you up, you know. No. So yes, these were very, very unpleasant, obviously, press news that people could be actually hurt, or harmed terribly by the fact of speaking the language that certain parts of community does not like, detest for various reasons. It's mostly political, and all these prejudices are actually based on extremely misinformed information that is passed on. So again, we have to be aware of it.
And I wondered, I mean, that was something I was wondering aloud recently. You think how much having more languages. I'm thinking now about the UK in particular. In this case, for the particular moment in time that we are experiencing here, how much would knowing more languages and being more open to languages, which is not to say that in the UK people are not, but to a less extent than other places, there's some complacency about the fact that everyone speaks our language anyway, and this is something that you hear. And so to what extent does this lack of relating and speaking and owning other languages also make people less tolerant, less understanding, less willing to engage with people who are different, more reacting in this sort of quite aggressive in quite aggressive way. So maybe more languages would be good, not just for our intellectual improvement, for communication, but also to make us a better place.
And make us more human.
Yes. Yes.
That's really what it is. But still, just to entertain the thought, because we don't seem to have any questions.
Whether
so
I click the wrong
disconnection somewhere, but just to keep the conversation going a little bit and referring to some of the points. I mean, if you actually entertain the thought for a moment and wonder about, all right, okay, we have now lingua franca, that is English in that part of the world, but at the same time, this is one of the questions that Deborah Cameron in her lecture delivered at Arizona University raised. The lecture, by the way, is available on YouTube. So if you put verbal hygiene Deborah Cameron Arizona, there's a link.
There's a link on the page.
I think we have lovely.
At the bottom of the page. Yes.
I mean, because she
raises, ones that can access YouTube.
Yes,
because
she raises this very interesting question about, okay, who is on the list of possible candidates to take the place of lingua franca? And actually she lists 3 possible candidates. The top one is Mandarin, okay, when we speak about the number of speakers that the language currently has. The second that she lists is Globish, okay, and Globish again is this kind of a constructed language, partly through the popularity of internet, online communication and all of it. And I think it also overlaps a little bit with a slightly different suggestion made by Emily Apter, who has also published a very interesting book called The Translation Zone, and whose last chapter is devoted to Netlist, okay? And the chapter has the very peculiar title, Everything is Translatable, and actually refers, so we have this kind of globish Netlist, yes, possibilities, and then, Everything is Translatable is the chapter that actually talks about machine translation as well. And this is, again, kind of the third utopian candidate, if you wish, yes, to take the place of current lingua franca. And actually, when you think, yes, about all these possibilities, there is no way of knowing. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what language will be the next lingua franca, but obviously things pass. So it's not like we are stuck for eternity with this particular situation, but certain mechanisms can be timeless, and that's precisely is what we are trying to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, and I just recommend the lecture to those of you who are curious about it
and able to watch it, and yes. Also I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think about the different ways in which, I mean, again, coming from or being someone who lives in the UK and to a lesser extent in Italy. Well, I don't know about the situation in Poland. I don't know about the situation much about the situation in Poland at all. But it was quite amazing to me on a recent trip that I did with the university, actually for another project, which is actually linked, but I won't go into this. We went to Ghana for a production. And in Ghana, we were in a small town, an hour away from the capital, so not in the capital, and we were working with young people between the ages of, or from the age of 8 and 15. The bulk was so teenagers who normally, in their everyday interaction, spoke 2 or 3 languages. That was the norm. I mean, it wasn't nothing to remark upon. In fact, that was something that surprised me, because when I was talking to them, I thought that they would remark upon the variety of languages. There was nothing exceptional about it. These are communities that normally function into 3 local languages plus English, and in an interaction there would be different according to the speaker. They would be able to adapt. They had this repertoire, and they could choose the language that the speaker would understand. If nothing worked, then English could be used. And I wonder what would happen if we all had this capacity of, having more than one language and being able to pick and choose. To some extent, that happens when I'm in Italy as well, with Friulana, and we do have, when we go out with my friends, we do have these conversations which are bilingual, in which we mix the 2 languages.
Code switching, yes.
Code switching galore, yes.
Languaging, and
yes.
Doing all of this work. Yes, I mean, but precisely, the idea is to make space, yes, to make open up very often the space for the speakers of other languages and make them feel comfortable, make them feel good about this, do not make them feel ashamed of speaking the language. So we have all these wonderful practices and examples that are in the upcoming week 3 on our course, examples precisely of how room can be made for speakers of other languages in the country where there is obviously one official language, and people are expected to learn this language. But again, it does not mean that they have to give up their own, that they have to give up their native. And these spaces, yes, I mean, have also been expanded in a very interesting way. For example, there have been a lot of theatre productions recently in the UK that used more than one language on stage. It's part of my research of migratory theatre and the Polish English theatre, which is partly a result of the Polish being now 2nd most common language in the UK. And it is really wonderful is when you live in a country in which one language dominates, and yet you go to a theatre and you hear your native tongue. Yes, the review, one of the reviews that was written, for example, in the current, in the famous daily, The Herald, when the opening night took place of the performance many years ago in Edinburgh in the Travers Theatre, then the title of the review was in Polish, and imagine the shock of opening the British paper and having the Polish title.
Oh,
and the Polish title was Przełamywanie barier języka, okay, which means really breaking the linguistic barriers, because there were no diacritics, okay. So it was just an approximation of this title, but it is again, yes, this wonderful gesture, the gesture of, yes, other languages are welcome. welcome as well. Yes, other languages are the community languages, and we welcome them.
And it's also sorry. Also this breaking this idea that there is a zero-sum game, that you somehow, if you make space for other languages, that means that you've got to give up on English, or you've got to give up on whatever it is, the lingua franca. But you don't. There's human beings have a capacity to speak an infinite number of languages, again at different degrees of proficiency or competence. But there isn't this. It doesn't mean that you can't speak English anymore, Lynn, but it means that you can speak many other languages besides English. It's not a zero-sum game, and this sometimes seems to be the case. So if you argue against a monolingual English world, it doesn't mean that you don't want English to exist anymore. It means that that's fine, but let's add more languages, and that's it.
Yes, yes. I mean, speaking on this particular note, there was also a very, very interesting comment made by Judith. Judith pointed out that she actually works with children who speak 4 or 5 languages, but they never become proficient in any of them. And this is really something quite disturbing as well, because, imagine, yes, a person who does not have a native language, okay, who acquires over the different moments of their time due to certain political events, due to historical events, due to being shifted. I had a student in the past who precisely spoke 3 languages, all with a charming accent, but made mistakes in all these languages and really did not have what we consider as a native tongue. And I think that really due to globalization and due to all the different crises, it was actually a child who came out of the former Yugoslavia conflict, and obviously with parents she was shifted into countries where different languages were spoken, and never long enough in one particular area to develop native abilities in this particular language. So again, where do we go from there? Okay, what does this kind of multilinguality mean, and what does it imply for the future of this particular particular person? So these are really very very difficult questions and very complex problems, and it seems to me that we will be facing more and more these kind of problems as of course and displacement. So again, to make this lovely connection to our next week, because our next week material actually talks about how you can fill this space where very often people don't share a common language. What comes out of such a meeting? How can one be touched by hearing a sound one does not understand? And how we can actually turn this into an experience that can enrich us mutually, that can benefit us mutually. The visual, all right, the acoustic, okay. The music was already mentioned. We have this wonderful picture book, and I saw some of the comments just today before I came here, how fascinated you have become with the Arrival and the whole discussion about the picture book Arrival, which was used in a school, yes, with children 10, 13. It was Evelyn who has written this article, our colleague, yes, who worked with children, and her wonderful experience about how people, young people, speak different languages, and how the pictures actually engage them in a conversation, and how they very much try to talk to each other using, yes, this kind of a silence that is described by the author and the illustrator of this work as the language of the language of the soul. Yes, so you will find wonderful examples in this upcoming week, precisely of what does it mean and to what extent what we do understand by learning or acquiring a language is being a creative arts. How can creative arts enhance our linguistic abilities and at the same time make us more open, not to lose by not understanding something, but to gain in the process of trying to do so.
Thank you, Elvira. And with this and an invitation to be with us next week, we will say goodbye. We hope you've not been trying to write questions.
We cannot connect, sorry guys, you know, doesn't look like there are any questions coming. We do not hear.
We have a question
viewers,
box, but it doesn't
viewers.
seem that anything has happened. Hopefully not because we did something wrong. If so, if this were the case, please accept our apologies. We'll do better next time. We'll learn this system as well. And thank you to all the learners that have been engaging so much and so productively with our course. It's been a pleasure to read your comments, your thoughts, your poems, and a particular welcome also to our returning learners, because we have people who have been back, that did the course before and have been back, and a particular thank you to Yoko, who is always commenting and giving us so much to think about. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you very much, and please do stay for the third week because you have this wonderful treat by Ha Orchestra as the final episode of the course. So please do not miss out on this, okay? I'll thank you very much, and yes, well,
goodbye.
Goodbye. Thanks.
Goodbye, thank you.